Hi, everyone. Welcome. I am seeing a couple of familiar names coming up. So, welcome to everyone joining us from the Change Lawyers family or however you heard about this event. We know that a lot of folks have been forwarding and sending the event out to their networks. So, thank you for spreading the word. And if you want to drop in the chat box your name, your pronouns, and where you're joining us from, and we're going to go ahead and get started in about a minute, just giving folks some time to join. Hi, welcome. I see some of you. So if everyone who's joining us wants to let us know who you are, in the comment box, let us know what your name is, what your pronouns are, and where you are joining us from. My name is Carlos. I use he, they pronouns, and I am coming at you from Oakland today. Hi, Carrie. Nice to see you. Hi, Cindy. Hi, Melissa, joining us from New Orleans. Wow. Welcome. All right, folks. So let's go ahead and get started. My name is Carlos. I am the Chief Content Director at Change Lawyers. And for those of you who do not know about Change Lawyers, we are a legal foundation and we empower and fund the next generation of lawyers and activists. And welcome to Leaders Forum. Leaders Forum is a virtual leadership development academy for outsiders who want a seat at the table. So if you're a lawyer, if you're an activist, if you're someone who wants to make a change, and you often feel like you're the only one in the room, Leaders Forum is for you. From now until the end of June 2022, we'll be hosting free workshops on a variety of different topics, things like imposter syndrome, how to network, how to heal from burnout. If those are topics that you're interested in, you can click on the link in the description box to register for those events as well. Now, a little bit about today's workshop. So today is a kickoff to Leaders Forum. It's the very first one we're hosting. And today's workshop is called Make Hella Social Impact, How to Show Up for Racial Justice. And Change Lawyers is very, very proud to be partnering with Hella Social Impact. They will be leading today's event as well as 5 other upcoming events in the Academy. And Hella Social Impact is a group of folks that exists to notice, name, and dismantle systems of white supremacy, patriarchy, and other forms of oppression that marginalize, exclude, exploit, and harm Black and non-Black people of color. So I would just like to welcome Lynn and Stefania to the stream. Thank you for being with us today.
Hey, Carlos. Thanks for having us.
Hi, everyone. So I'll go ahead and introduce myself first. My name is Stefania Pomponi. I'm one of the founders of Hella Social Impact. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'm a proud biracial, Korean American, Italian, third culture woman of color, mama of 3. I am cisgendered, straight, and neurotypical. Some identities that I'm bringing with me into the room today are a lover of car chase scenes in movies, a flaming hot Cheeto addict, and also a lover of ratchet hip hop. I'm coming to you from stolen Ramaytush Ohlone land in Palo Alto, California. And for those who may be visually impaired or who may not be able to see their screens clearly today, I have below shoulder length, light brown hair. I'm wearing a gray turtleneck sweater and glasses, and it's really great to be with you today. Now I'll turn it over to my partner, who will introduce herself.
Hey, y'all. My name is Lynn Johnson. I am a co-founder and CEO of Hella Social Impact. I am coming to you all today from the ancestral lands of the Pueblo people, otherwise known as Albuquerque, New Mexico, where we're actually experiencing a little bit of a snow day. It did not keep my daughter home from school, which she was bummed about, but we are enjoying the flurries coming down. I identify as a Black, queer, cisgender woman. and I use she, her pronouns. I also identify as educated and neurotypical, and an adoptive mom and partner and wife. And for those of you who are visually impaired or may not be able to see the screen, I have short, very short hair, and brown, like kind of a brownish reddish hair I think is going on right now. Brown skin, clear glasses, and I'm wearing an olive green top. And I'm going to start us off today. So I invite everyone to kind of settle in, and we believe at Hella that the arts and movement are really, in culture, are a really important part of our work as professionals. And so I'm going to start us off today with a poem, an original poem that I wrote a few months ago called A Poem for America. My great-great-grandmother was named America Williams. I don't know much about her. I don't know exactly how hard she worked, although it was damn hard, or if she was able to get any rest at all. I don't know if she could read or write or imagine herself in faraway places. I don't know how she met her husband, if she said yes to the first man who asked, or if they were madly and deeply in love. I don't know what she thought of the world around her or her place in it. I do know that America was born of enslaved people: Miles, African; Helen, Native; Cherokee, as my grandmother claimed. I know that she had brothers and sisters, all of whom were raising kids in South Carolina at the end of the 19th century, when lynchings of Black bodies were as common as the rice on their plates. I know that she made Emma, who made Dorothy, who made Dana, who made me. And I know absolutely that America knows me. She sees the person I am, how I show up for my friends and family, an eternal drama geek, a playful idealist, incredibly confident while navigating loads of self-doubt. She sees me struggle to define where home is, the long nights of wondering if I'm doing enough, all the questions and theories and poems and frameworks and stories I create by living life with my eyes and heart wide open. America watches me work every day. She admires how I see the invisible patterns in the systems designed to separate us from our humanity. America sees these patterns through my eyes and understands why she worked so damn hard. America watches as I play my part to dismantle these systems every day. How I choose love over perfect, laughter over efficient, caring over accomplished. America watches me as I parent my daughter every day. She sees how I try as best I can to give her space to be exactly who she is, despite my own fears and judgments and need to control. She sees how we tease and snuggle and dance, how we move through the rage and trauma and decide to stay a family no matter what. America watches how our community makes a way as the invisible patterns and systems work hard to cut us off. I don't know much about America, but America knows me. She sent Emma to Dorothy, to Dana, to me, so that I can be here doing this. She knows that despite the pain and harm and doubt and utter exhaustion, I will get up every day and keep it moving. She knows I will do it for her. She knows that she didn't work so damn hard for me to decide otherwise. My great-great-grandmother was America, and she knows why I'm here.
Lynn, do you want to invite folks to?
Yes, thank you. In the spirit of the poem, let's honor our ancestors. And I'm curious, those watching, who is looking now as you show up here to do this work? Carlos, if you'll put that question highlight that question for us. Who are you bringing into this space with you right now? Who's looking over you right now, here today? As you show up to in your place to dismantle white supremacy and to show up for racial justice. Thanks for the claps, everybody. I see some of the applause. I'd love to see who you're bringing in with you today. Great. Dad. Thank you, Erna. Thank you, Cindy. Carrie's bringing chosen family. Great. Lolo and Lola are here in the space with us. Thank you, Natalie, for the applause. Keep thinking about who you're honoring today, which ancestors you'd like to honor, and we'll get into more into who we are and what we're doing over here at Hella Social Impact.
So as we wait for our slides to come up, we are so honored to be with you, as Carlos mentioned at the top, for a series of 6 workshops with the underpinning of showing up for racial justice, but covering a variety of topics. And so today, as Carlos also mentioned, we're giving you the overview, kind of the beginning of the journey. Let's pretend we're on the Bachelorette, beginning of the journey towards racial justice and how we're going to get there together. So as Carlos mentioned, we at Hella Social Impact help organizations show up for racial justice. And as we advance forward, these are our co-founders, and I think this is when the photographer said, pretend like your album's about to drop. So you can see Lynn, myself, and then co-founders Edita Rodriguez on the far left and Ashley Keeler on the far right. And they are not with us today here, but they are always with us in spirit. So our mission at Hella Social Impact is that we exist to notice, name, and dismantle systems of white supremacy, patriarchy, and other forms of oppression that marginalize, exclude, exploit, and harm Black, Indigenous, and non-Black people of color. So in all of our policies, practices, and programs and partnerships, and even here with you today, from the minute that we showed up with you on screen today, we are working to co-create a world where Black, Indigenous, and non-Black people of color can show up as our authentic selves, tell our stories, as Lynn just did, and be heard. And the co-create piece of our mission is really important. Lynn likes to say that we link arms with our partners and clients on this mission towards dismantling white supremacy. And we need you all. We need you all to do that in order to accomplish our mission. We have to do it together. So we take it really seriously that we are here and with you today. And when we're working with clients, working with our clients to make progress towards our overall mission. We can't do it alone. And so we thought we'd also start with a level set of how we think about showing up for racial justice and what that means. We're going to talk about a lot of terminology over and over again, racial justice, white supremacy, all of that. So we're just going to take a minute to level set what that means for us and how we view it. And if you have any questions, we'll have time for Q&A at the end, but you can also drop them in the chat or hold on to them then. We like to have as much of an interactive experience as we possibly can. So Racial justice, the way we see it, is the systematic fair treatment of people of all races, resulting in equitable opportunities and outcomes for all. So racial justice or racial equity goes beyond anti-racism. That's not where it ends. It's not just the absence of discrimination and inequities, but also the presence of deliberate systems and supports to achieve and sustain racial equity through proactive and preventative measures. So we're being very intentional that we're showing up this way beyond anti-racism, but to create new systems of dismantling white supremacy so that people of all races can be seen, heard, and believed. And when we talk about systemic or structural racism, we're talking about the arrangement, the intentional arrangement of institutional, interpersonal, historical, and cultural dynamics in a way that consistently produces advantages for whites and chronic adverse outcomes for people of color. It illuminates that racism exists without the presence of individual actors because it is systemically embedded. And when we talk about white supremacy, and we name that explicitly, it's the existence of racial power that denotes a system of structural or societal racism, which privileges white people over others, regardless of the presence or the absence of racial hatred. So it's there, it exists. White racial advantages occur at both a collective and individual level. And both people of color and white people can perpetuate white dominant culture. And we're going to talk about that in a future workshop. But we are so embedded into white supremacy culture that even as folks of color, we can perpetuate it and be a part of it. And it's seeped into us without us even knowing. It's that insidious. And that results in the overall disenfranchisement of people of color in many/all aspects of society. And so, with all of the things that we could focus on to make social impact in the world, why do we focus on racial equity? Well, racial equity is our way at Hella Social Impact, our way into talking about authentic inclusion. And we specifically focus on racial equity because white people will talk about anything but race. When we show up in spaces to talk about racial equity as a way to transform cultures and build inclusion, we will often hear, but what about, but what about, but what about? And I'm sure most of you are familiar with that notion of whataboutism. But caring about race and caring about other marginalized folks can exist at the same time. We can care about all of it. We choose to focus on the most marginalized among us because it makes society, life better for everyone. And we already know that making things better for white folks doesn't make things better for people on the margins. And we're seeing that play out right now with this Supreme Court nomination talk. And when we focus on racial equity, it provides a framework and tools and resources that can also be applied to other areas. So we're talking about intersectionality there, and that, race is the thing that makes life difficult for all intersections. That's why we focus there. And so, how do we do this? And how do we do this from the moment that we show up in a space? We do this by centering Black, Indigenous, and non-Black people of color at all times, always. And that means that we promise to make space, and we're getting into some of our values here. So we promise to make space for stories and voices, Black, Indigenous, non-Black people of color, their stories, their voices, our voices. And we promise to believe these stories. We also will call in any racist ideas or behavior and all other forms of oppression. So you may see that today. It may happen in subsequent webinars, but we promise to do that, and we'll do it. And we will also name dominant culture where it lives. So you'll see us doing that a lot over the next series of workshops. We will also choose white discomfort over POC harm. And we also speak plain. We like to get to the heart of the matter. And one of the ways that we dismantle white supremacy culture is just naming what it is, saying what it is, speak plain. We also practice strong facilitation skills. And when we go in to work with organizations, one of the ways that we do that is by holding agendas for meetings really tightly. That means that, when we know what's happening in the agenda, we can prepare for all of these things to happen that we're talking about and make sure that the space is safe for us as facilitators and for those folks in the room as well. We will also engage in multiple learning styles. So while it's not ideal that we're sitting here speaking at you from a screen, it would be great if we were up together and moving and having other modes of learning. We try as much as we can to engage you all and make it feel like we're in person, even if we're not. And one of the ways we do that is to integrate music, art, play, and movement and other forms of culture in what we do. And you saw a little bit of that with Lynn's poem at the top. That's really important for the work that we do. And it's also a way that we practice self-care in the work that we do. And lastly, we take responsibility and repair when we mess up. We are not perfect. And so in a space that centers Black, Indigenous, and non-Black people of color, we fully expect you all to call us in if we are messing up. Goes both ways. And now I will turn it over to Lynn.
I want to thank you, Stefania. I want to set the stage a bit because we're about to go into the part of our presentation where we, this session is called How to Show Up for Racial Justice. We have a framework for that. We talk about what that means. It's a very simple framework. But and thank you, Stefania, for kind of setting the stage with our values, with some definitions. But, speaking about bringing ancestors into this space, I just want to take a minute to really focus on, why we're here and to honor some ancestors. So in addition to my great-great-grandmother, I also want to bring in Fannie Lou Hamer with this really brief video.
Mississippi is still a very rough place. People is not just walking up like they used to do in the past, walking out, shooting a man down or getting maybe 200 or 300 people carrying you out and lynching you, but it's in a more settled way. They can let you starve to death, not give you jobs. These are some of the things that's happening right now in Mississippi. See, Mississippi is not actually Mississippi's problem. Mississippi is America's problem. Because if America wanted to do something about what has been going on in Mississippi, it could have stopped by now. It wouldn't have been in the past few years, between 40 and 50 churches bombed and burned. You see, and this leads me to say, all of the burning and bombing that was done to us and the houses, nobody never said too much about that, and nothing was done. But let something be burned, by a Black man, and then, my God, you see, the flag is drenched with our blood. Because, you see, so many of our ancestors was killed because we have never accepted slavery. We had to live on it, but we've never wanted it. So we know that this flag is drenched with our blood. So what the young people are saying now, give us a chance to be young men, respected as a man, as we know this country was built on the black backs of Black people across this country. And if we don't have it, you ain't gonna have it either, because we gonna tear it up. That's what they saying. And people ought to understand that. I don't see why they don't understand that. They know what they've done to us. All across this country, they know what they've done to us. This country is desperately sick, and man is on the critical list. I really don't know where we go from here.
I would love to see here any reflections, questions, anything that comes up for you as you watch this video. For those of you who don't know, Fannie Lou Hamer was doing the work many of you were doing. Was very active in the voting rights in Mississippi, all throughout the South in the 60s. Had a personal story about not being able to register to vote in Mississippi. Was very active in all kinds of policy change throughout the South, throughout the United States. And yeah, sadly, things haven't changed that much, has it? Yeah. Thanks for sharing. That's when I saw this video, it was astounding to me how she's just one of my idols. So I just really wanted to bring her in, but also how relevant it is to this day, unfortunately, and how we're in an environment right now where there are still people who are denying the fact that any of this existed, denying the experience of Black folks and folks of color, Indigenous folks and non-Black folks of color in this country, saying that to teach about the truth about this country should be a crime and how it divides us. And so we know we're here because we know that, yes, Carrie, this is systemic. And that in order to show up for racial justice, we have to understand those systems and we have to do something about them. And so that brings us into our framework, if I can press the right button here, which we call the Notice, Name, Dismantle framework. That's our, we call it the Hella racial justice spectrum. And, you know, James Baldwin this is a very famous quote that not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. So I wanted us to look Fannie Lou Hamer in the face and recognize that we have to face these truths about our society. And so the first step is the noticing. It is being aware of the truth of our history. It's being aware of the truth of our industry, of our company, of ourselves. It's about really paying attention to what is true. Just because I tell you, just because I've had a certain experience doesn't mean that that's the full truth. That's why we center Black folks and non-Black folks of color, because that truth is the truth that has been erased, that has been marginalized, it's been violently rejected. And now it's time for us to, well, it's always been time, but in our work, we're constantly saying, how do we notice the stories that have been ignored? So when we, in that noticing phase, we're asking ourselves, and when I say we in this presentation, I'm talking about us as individuals, but I'm also talking about us as organizations and communities. So in the noticing phase, when we're doing this work of showing up for racial justice, we're noticing the legacy that structural racism and white supremacy has on the work that we do. We have to understand that. And a lot of us, you know, a lot of us here are folks of color, marginalized folks, and still we've been disconnected from our history, right? So it's important for us to know as well. We can't assume that we know the whole story. We ask ourselves, what do we need to know about our history? What are the lies and myths we've been taught? And how does that impact our current reality as individuals, as organizations? That work is key, and it's always happening constantly. I'm constantly, I don't know about you, right? But I'm constantly surprised when I read something or hear a story. I'm like, wow, are you kidding me? How was that taken out of the conversation for so long? We go from notice into name. Kendrick Lamar, the rapper, says, if I'm going to tell a real story, I'm going to start with my name. Naming is honoring what it is by calling it by its name. Stefania said, we speak plain. We call it like it is. And that's how we hold ourselves and others accountable to the work, to the harm that's been done, and to the impact we're trying to make in the future. Naming is kind of that messy middle, right? Where we acknowledge what the harm that's been done so that we can heal from it, so that we can build something new. And this is a messy middle part, because in naming, we have to ask ourselves questions like, how do we have the courage to move through that pain and discomfort of racism and speak plain about what's really happening? How do we face and acknowledge the pain? It's painful for all of us. The pain of white supremacy is felt by all of us. How do we acknowledge that so that we can take responsibility for our part and move towards healing and repair? This is when the really, we call them, courageous conversations happen. Because we have to move into dismantling. The writer, producer, director, Janet Mock says that, telling our stories first to ourselves and then to one another and the world is a revolutionary act. Revolution, y'all, is, it's the dismantling. It's the elimination and the change of these harmful practices, policies, and procedures to make way for something new. When we dismantle, it's justice in action. You, in your work as change lawyers, you're doing this every day. How are we building something new? But it's not necessarily new. People often ask me, like, one time I was in a session and someone said, okay, isn't there a fourth piece? You say notice, you say name, you say dismantle. Isn't there a fourth piece? What happens after you dismantle? What do you build? And I told him, it's already there. Our ancestors, right, have been creating the alternatives forever. Fannie Lou Hamer said it. Black folks in this country, for example, have never accepted slavery, ever. So when we dismantle, what we're doing is we're rejecting what's not working. We're releasing what no longer serves us, and we're reclaiming. We're recovering what's been previously lost. We're reclaiming Indigenous practices. We're reclaiming the freedom our ancestors taught us. That's going to help us rebuild the systems and structures and policies and procedures to our racial justice. We started this with a poem, right? How old is poetry? That's an old practice. That's not a new practice. It's not, on one hand, it's not revolutionary, but it is, because it's something that's been buried and relegated to, that's not business, that's not professional. But it's what makes us feel good as humans. That's what we need. That's the dismantling. At Hella, we say, do the work. Tell your story. And that's when you earn trust. That's where you make Hella social impact. Notice, naming, and dismantling. When we're on that racial justice journey, on that spectrum, we're doing the work and we want to talk about it. We really work with our clients on the communication of it. How do we live it out loud, right? And not just in the shadows. How do we come out of the closet as anti-racist and racial justice activists so that other people, other organizations are modeling after what we're doing? So that the folks who really try to show up for, they start to trust us. That's where the impact is made. So I'm going to stop sharing there for a second, because that's the end of that piece of it. And yeah, Ashley, the accountability is so important. I think that, it's true. It is this piece of, we see a lot in our work, Stefania and I, Stefania, feel free to jump in. We see in our work so many people who of all races, white folks included, who are like, I really want to do something. What do I do? How do I and so that's why we really hold on to this framework, right? Because we find that there's a simplicity in that. Do the work of noticing. There's so much out there. Do the work of naming, just naming something as it is, call it out. You'll notice that we introduced ourselves, right? The way we introduced ourselves. Twan, do you want to talk about that? Sorry.
Yeah. So no, that I was just, as you were saying that, I was realizing I didn't even acknowledge the way that we introduced ourselves. That is a practice that we call inclusive introductions, and we're going to talk more about inclusion next time, so that the way we introduce ourselves is the way we always introduce ourselves. And that was a little bit of a preview for the next session, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But I wanted to pick up on something you were saying, Lynn, about that piece of our work that is so communications focused. And this might be something for all of y'all to think about as well. We often hear, and you may often hear in your work, a lot of fear. I don't know where to begin. Our organization doesn't know where to begin. We don't want to do it wrong. We don't want to seem performative. How do we show up? We don't want to virtue signal, all of these things. Well, one of the things that we tell our clients is that the communications piece of it, as Lynn was saying, is crucial for folks of color on the outside looking into your work or to your organization's work to know to know what is happening in that organization. So even if you don't know where to begin, talk about it. Even if, you've put out a racial justice statement or some kind of social impact statement, but you feel it's performative, talk about that. Because the only way that you will attract diverse, marginalized folks to your organization or cause is for those folks to know what's up with you and with your organization. So in that way, we are a little bit different from the way that other people may work in the DEI space. We actually don't think of ourselves as typical consultants in that regard. But in terms of the fear that you may have seen or felt, face it, name it, and talk about it. That is one way that you can begin on that path of dismantling.
So I'm going to share one more thing with you, and then we're going to kind of take any comments or questions that you all have. We want to open it up a little bit, but I want to show you a tool that is a quiz that we created. And this tool, it's called the Growing Up I quiz. And let's see. Oh, here we go. So the Growing Up I quiz, it looks like this. Sorry, I'm going to get back to the first page here. Well, this is good enough. So the Growing Up I quiz is a way for you to, it's a reflection tool. It's a tool about doing the work and starting to tell your story. This is for personal reflection. So we use this tool with organizations, but this is something that you can use on your own. And it's a series of statements that helps to identify what your relationship to dominant culture, so where you kind of roll through the world with where you're not really noticing, because the closer we are to dominant culture, to white, straight, cisgender, male, Christian, etc. culture, and I'm talking about the context of our country, the United States of America, English speaking, educated, etc. Then those are some of the places where you might not have been forced to or encouraged to notice the truth of what's happening. And then in the places where our identities feel more marginalized, whether that's Black or Indigenous or a woman or femme or genderqueer or non-binary or immigrant, et cetera, that's when you start to really, you have a different story, you have a different view. So this is one of those quizzes. You've taken something like this before, probably, but this is just a tool that we felt has worked for us, and it brings up story. We love stories. We're storytellers, really, at heart, and it just brings up stories. So this quiz is not perfect, as this is saying. There will be some statements that are not. You won't exactly know how to answer, because all the statements are prefaced by "growing up, I," right? So, like, for the example, the first one is. Growing up, I was raised by the people who gave birth to me. Yes or no? Everything is a yes or no question. So sometimes you're like, I can't quite, I don't know. And that's okay. You don't answer with whatever the truth is that you feel like you can answer in the moment, right? And in the end, you kind of get a score. You get a score, and the higher your score, the kind of closer you are to dominant culture, the lower your score, the closer you are to marginalized culture. It's just a way of reflecting on yourself and how you show up, how you move through the world. So this is a quiz we're offering you. We're offering this quiz now because in our next course, our next class, we're really talking about inclusion and what this means. Like, what does it mean to include everybody? Folks, from all kinds of identities, because that's hard work. What does that really look like? So we're just offering that. And thank you, Carlos, for putting in the comments where you can get those materials. Actually, when you fill out this little form, you will get the link to this quiz. You will get actually all the slides from our presentation, and you will get a copy of the poem I read at the beginning. So that's where you'll get all that stuff. So that's a tool to kind of bridge from today's class to the next class, which is happening later in February. So I just wanted to show that to you. And I definitely want to open it up for comments or questions. We have Irma from Kavina. America cannot hide from racism. We must deal with the effects to start to dismantle them. It's true, we do. We try to hide, though, don't we, Irma? We try very hard to hide from the effects of racism, but we don't get very far, right? And the point is that it's easier to hide when you haven't been encouraged to do the noticing. And so I think, we get a lot of comments from people who really were like, we talk a lot about how our business our business started after the death of George Floyd in 2020, right? So a lot of we were doing the work long before then as individuals, but in terms of the Hella's birth story, it happened following that really pivotal moment. And so we meet a lot of people, a lot of professionals who are like, wow, white folks, but mainly, who are like, wow, I really didn't notice. I didn't know all of these things. I didn't know so much before that moment. And part of me is like, really? How did you not notice? But it's because they weren't encouraged to. And not only that, is this, again, our stories, our marginalized stories were very intentionally erased, and violently sometimes. So it's not just not being encouraged, it's also the stories weren't there in the forefront, right? So we have a comment here from Gloria. Within my organization, senior management is predominantly white male. How do we bring change when we aren't part of that power structure? It's a great question. within my organization, senior management is predominantly male. How do we bring change when we are part of that power structure? I have an answer to that. Stefani, do you have an answer to that question? We can both address it.
I'll tag team it with you.
I feel like, okay, so I have a couple different answers to this, Gloria. One is there's a lot we can do, and then my other part of my answer is there's not much we can do, which I know is kind of a frustrating question. So one thing that we know is that, when we see this change happen, when we see this change happen at an organizational level, right, where an organization, especially a white-run, predominantly white-led organization, is really going to embrace anti-racism and racial justice, the one key factor in making that happen is that the senior management is on board. So when they're not on board, not much happens as an organization. White men who are not into it really can block it. So that's my discouraging answer. My encouraging answer is that we bring the change by living the notice, name, dismantle framework, especially that noticing and naming part in all the things that we do. So remember that the way that we do it is to center the folks that are most impacted, right? So that we can kind of be that that person that's always noticing, that's always naming, that's like being that person saying, hey, here's one thing we have to realize about what's happening here. Here are the voices that aren't at the table. Have you noticed that this has not happened? Have you noticed this hasn't happened? And all that kind of stuff that you're probably already doing, Gloria, to be honest. But it might not make a huge change in the organization, unfortunately. But what it does is it makes the people who we're focused on, it makes the most marginalized folks feel like, ooh, someone's got my back. And I can be more myself here. And then if those of us can't quite get where we want to go in that organization, then we leave and we do something else. And change might happen when we leave and do something else. That's kind of my answer. What do you want to say about that?
I was going to say almost exactly the same thing. And I'll add that accountability is the best way to begin this change. So as Lynn said, there has to be buy-in from the top down, from CEO, executive director, whoever, president, whoever is the top of your organization down. And the way that you can approach that is by looking at your culture code or mission statement or value statement. Every organization has one. And so if leadership says they care about racial justice, social impact, we can begin to tie that caring to a culture, to the values, to the mission, and very quickly see how bullshit that is most of the time. And so, we are up against hundreds of years of dominant culture, white supremacy, patriarchy, when we're trying to make this change. And the change is going to be slow and it's going to be messy, but starting with the, if we all have an abolitionist, or as Jamel Hill says, abolitionesque mindset, if we can't get all the way to abolitionist, we're going to start with trying to get the accountability from the top, no matter who's there. Then we're going to call in all the ways that the culture and mission and values do not support that, that buy-in, that yes, we stand for this. And again, yes, as Lynn said, sometimes, it can get to a point where it gets super messy. And that's when the white folks go, yeah, we care about racial justice, but only up to here. It's too hard, too difficult, only up to here. And we may have to leave, but we've already started the process of dismantling white supremacy. We've already given the Black, Indigenous, and non-Black folks of color within the organization a taste of what it could be. We've already started to fuck shit up and dismantle even after we leave. And that helps us to get closer to our co-created mission.
There's one more comment, but one thing I want to add to that, Gloria, is that I hope that doesn't feel discouraging, because it makes a big difference. Like even if the organization can't change, showing up for the individuals really can make a big difference. And the last thing I'll say is that there's always there might be someone in management who is actually ready to move, but they're afraid of pissing off their colleagues, or like being the first one to step out into that brave space. And so if that person does exist on your management team, it's about encouraging that person to be the first. So we can talk about that later. Okay, we have something else, Stefania, here, and then we're gonna kind of need to wrap it up soon. But what can or should we be doing at law schools to support students of color, first gen, and others who may not feel welcomed in the academic environment? Ooh, good. This is really connected to our next class, Stefania, in terms of inclusion.
It is, yeah. I'll just an anecdote I can share is that for a long time I would go down to USC and help teach a class in the business school, and every time I walked into that building, in the lobby, I would see a bunch of white men on the walls, all graduates or really donors to that school on the walls, all of their accomplishments, one woman. And every time I went in there, I would say to the professor, a friend of mine who brought me in, I can't, you got to do something about this. Like, what do women think and other marginalized folks think every time they step into this lobby and see a sea of white faces? And so she very slowly began the process of making that one particular change carefully, because again, these are donors, but it took 4 years. It took 4 years, but they finally switched out all of the white male faces in the lobby for more of a running list of accomplishments from folks who had graduated from that business school. And so all that to say, when folks of color can start to see themselves in that environment, that's where folks of color will start to believe that it is a safe and trusted place for them to show up in their fullest identities. And so that also ties back to the communication piece that we were talking about earlier. So in what ways can you lift up the lived experiences of those students of color, first gen, in the law school, and communicate that out to the public so that the folks that you are trying to center can see, oh, okay, this is a place where I can belong. That's one way. And that, yes, that does tie us into what we will be talking about next time.
And I know you want to say a little bit about that. And I just want to say to Susan that the very end of this question is how to feel welcomed in the academic environment. And so I would throw back, how much of the traditional academic environment, quote unquote, do we need to keep? And what? We do a lot of work with culture, organizational culture of an organization, of a community. And so it's kind of like that bigger question of like, well, it's always been done this way. So it's about like fitting folks in who feel comfortable in that environment. And I would throw back at you, Susan, like, where can you talk to folks and say, oh, this part of academia I don't see myself here. So we have to change up that culture. Speaking of inclusion.
Yes. And so after spending this time with us today, you might be feeling some kind of way. You might be feeling anxious. You might be feeling like, as we're seeing in the questions, what can I do now? I need to do something now. I feel the pain. Someone commented, I feel the pain of racial injustice. That's the start of creating change. And I just want to remind us all to just take a deep breath. This work is hard and it is slow and it is multifaceted, and we are going to get into it over the next 5 sessions coming up. So the next session, we really are going to talk about what it means to build inclusion, and taking that quiz is going to be vital to the conversation that we have next time. So please do that and come prepared to share and talk about how that went for you. So just a brief overview. DEI, even the word, even the phrase itself, diversity, equity, and inclusion, starts in the wrong place. It starts with diversity, which, can often be that first performative fix that organizations do. Oh, we need to hire more blank. We need to attract more blank students. But we're not really talking about the environment in which those, employees or students are coming into. And so what we say, and where we think the real transformation begins to happen, is by building an inclusive environment first. And we started to do that a little bit this morning, or today, sorry, he may be in different time zones, when we introduced ourselves inclusively. And I'm wondering if some of you heard our inclusive introductions and thought, oh my gosh, me too. Oh, I like that. Oh, I'm the same. Yes. Like immediately you knew something about us by the way that we introduce ourselves. And that's the way we always introduce ourselves. So that is one practice that you can implement right away to begin to build inclusion in your organizations. But it is so important to start with inclusion first, because that means that, again, we've talked about this a couple times now, folks on the outside looking in I can see myself there. Oh, this is a safe and trusted space for me to show up in my full identities, or the identities I want to show up in at work. And I will be seen and heard and believed. And so we're going to start to explore that next time.
Very good. So I can't believe we're at the end. I saw that Sway. Hi, Sway. I'm so glad you're here. Had a question. And I just want to briefly about this dude who totally shut you down. He definitely shut you down. When you were trying to explain about kind of noticing generational systemic history of Black folks and mortgages, and that, well, it's better these days. Yeah. You don't let them shut you down. You can say to him, just because it's better these days does not mean that what happened in the past is not true. That's what I would say. And we could talk more, Sway, because you know me, so reach out.
Thank you so much, Stefania. Thank you so much, Lynn. I was taking notes because I introduced us all today. And when I heard you all introduce yourselves with your inclusive framework, it opened my eyes. And I was like, you know what? I can tell people a lot about who I am just like in that one sentence, right? So I am as much a student of this academy as everyone joining us today. So thank you all. I'll let you all go, and I'll see you next time. And for everyone in the audience, thank you for joining us. If you look in the description box, there's a link to our next webinar, which is next week on Thursday, February 10th. And that is about finding your people, finding your support system, how to network. If you're first gen, if you're a first person of color, it's going to be a fireside chat. And it's going to feature Change Lawyers Executive Director Chris Panombayan. So please join us for that. And catch Lynn and Stefania. They will be back on February 23rd to talk about radical inclusion, how to fix broken racist systems. And the links for registration are all in the description box. So thank you to everyone for joining us, and we'll see you next time.